Greetings. I wanted to take a brief look at a small portion of the Talmud, or as they say in Yiddish, we're going to look at a shtickle of Talmud. And the text that we're going to be looking at might strike some as controversial, so I just want to put that out there as a disclaimer, as there's honestly going to be a discriminatory element to it. But separate from that, I would propose that this text sheds light on the level of morphological diversity that existed amongst ancient Jewish communities, including communities around the temple. And personally, I find discussions on morphology, which is to say on outward appearance, unimportant. It's really not an interest of mine, but I thought it might be worthwhile to make this minor contribution to the many discussions of that sort which are happening on social media. So the page of Talmud on your screen is from Talmud Bavli, tractate Bekhorot, specifically page 45b. That mem-he stands for 45, and the two dots signify that it's the second side or the back side of the page. Perhaps we could say 45 verso. And so jumping right in, let's zoom in a bit to the portion we're going to examine. And to explain the structure of the Talmudic text, this portion here marks the start of a quote from the Mishnah. The precise string of characters that I have highlighted there is an abbreviated form of matnita, which is the Aramaic equivalent of Mishnah. And then the portion here marks the Gemara. And the Gemara serves as like a sort of commentary on or an elucidation of the Mishnah portion. So the Mishnah text is discussing, among other things, people who should be considered unfit for temple service, right? It's giving certain rabbis' opinions on who should be excluded from temple service. For example, the text treats people who are of a very short stature, who maybe it's not appropriate to say this, but people who would be considered quote-unquote dwarves, should be excluded according to one of the opinions in the Mishnah. Deaf people, people with drinking problems are treated as unfit for temple service, right? But the portion I want to focus on is this, which lists three types of people. It reads, Hakushi, Hagihor, Vihalabkan. The Kushi, the Gihor, and the Labkan. Now, as some know, Kushi initially meant a descendant of Cush, but over time, it came to be used as a morphological reference, right? Like saying black, unfortunately. But that raises the question, how is it intended here? And what about those other two words, Gihor and Labkan? What do they mean? Well, for that, we turn to the Gemara portion, which will attempt to elucidate those terms. And it reads as follows, Kushi, Uchma, a black. Gihur, Chiwara, a white. Labkan, Sumka, a red person. And then the subsequent text has some discussion in favor of switching the last two, arguing that Gihur actually means a red person and Labkan means white. But whatever the case, what seems obvious is that this text was arguing in favor of excluding both relatively dark-skinned persons and relatively light-skinned persons from temple service. Now, I say relatively because it was relative to the perspective of the people who favored these sorts of prohibitions, and presumably those people fell between those complexions, those different types of complexions. Now, of course, I appreciate and I understand that the idea of excluding people based on complexion is going to strike most as offensive, and I apologize for raising, such a controversial subject, and I hope it goes without saying that I'm not endorsing it. However, I'm not sharing this for that reason, right? I'm not trying to just kick up some controversy. As I mentioned a little while ago, I wanted to look at this text because I think it reveals something about the morphological diversity of the region, including persons around the temple, persons who are trying to participate in temple service. So let me put it this way. The Levant is akin to a nexus between Africa, Asia, and Europe. So common sense alone would cause one to lean in favor of the assumption that the population there would be diverse. Beyond that, the genetic evidence likewise implies that the ancient Levant was diverse, with a swirl of contributions from East Africa, Southern Europe, and even the Caucasus. And so too, the textual evidence implies morphological diversity. If certain people were trying to exclude very dark-skinned persons and very light-skinned persons from temple service, that implies that such was otherwise a legitimate possibility. It implies a range of skin tones amongst those who were trying to serve in the temple. And honestly, I think a case could be made for allusions to such diversity even being in the biblical text. But perhaps that's a discussion for another time. Whatever the case, the main point that I'm trying to get across here is that this Talmudic text perhaps like certain biblical texts, speaks to the range of morphologies that existed in the region, including the environment around the temple. But having said that, I'll close this short video here. As always, I welcome any comments, questions, or criticisms. So feel free to share your thoughts, whether positive or negative, because I don't censor anyone here. And God bless